really happy to be doing this panel with a set of friends from the impact ecosystem. And warm welcome to all of you. Aakanksha, Akshay, Divya and Rohit. Welcome to the Governance Challenge. Just to give you some context, today and tomorrow we are doing the nationals of the Governance Challenge. Before this, one campus winner, one team has been selected from each of the 26 campuses across the country. These are the top B schools, policy schools and some IITs. And between today and tomorrow, they are presenting their solutions to a jury. And basis this, 6 teams will be selected and they'll be pitching their ideas to the Chief Minister of Haryana in the finale, which will happen on the 1st of October in Chandigarh. So that's where the overall challenge is at this stage. And the objective of this specific panel is to really inspire this young talent, top young talent from the best campuses across the country to take up careers in the impact space, to choose impact as a career like all of us have done. And for the participants, for the audience, some common things amongst everyone on the panel here. All of them come from very similar backgrounds and similar campuses that you guys are studying right now at. And somewhere down the line, they've made a conscious choice to create and build a career in impact for themselves. Now, 15 years back, when everyone here was graduating at the time, there were not as many options. There were not so many possibilities, and therefore everyone, I think, started on the corporate tack, but very soon made the switch, and has since then been working in the impact space. And as I said, roughly, I think everyone is from similar vintage, around 15 years of work experience cutting across corporate and the impact space. So they'll draw on those experiences, that wisdom, learnings and insights with all of you. We'll keep the format simple since the idea is to take a lot of questions from all of you that you may have. What I'll just request everyone, and I'll start with myself, is to just share about their own journey in let's say 3 odd minutes. And once we are done with that, then we'll start taking questions from the audience. I'll start with my own journey briefly. So I have grown up in Delhi. I did my schooling here. In fact, Divya, who's on the panel here, we were classmates at school. And after schooling, I went on to do my computer science and engineering from IIT Delhi. It was a dual degree course, BTech and MTech in computer science. IIT was the first time I started really thinking, what do I want to really do in life? Life mein karna kya hai? And the answer was very intuitive, I would say, organic, somewhere deep down. The thinking was clear that I want to do something that creates impact at scale, something that improves the quality of life of people in a meaningful way. Politics was always intriguing. Governance had started becoming an area of interest. Didn't actually know how to go about doing that. And therefore, I decided to just continue on the trodden path, continue on the assembly line, as I call it. So went on to do my MBA from IIM Calcutta, did my summer internship with McKinsey & Company, got a PPO and joined McKinsey from campus as a management consultant. The plan at the time was that I'd be there for 2 years and in the interim figure out how I want to kind of contribute and create impact at scale. McKinsey came out really well. I was enjoying what I was doing. I was learning, getting opportunities, was doing well. It was a very, very good ride. Ended up spending a little more time, but also started getting restless around the 3-year mark. And I always say, just because the highway is good, one cannot continue to drive on it if your destination is something else. And that was exactly the case with me. The destination was impact. McKinsey was a great highway, but I didn't want to kind of continue it for too long. So I quit in 2012 and I traveled across the country for around 6 months. And this took me to around 70 odd districts in 17 different states in the country. Saw work of some 25 organizations working in the impact space, shadowed district administration, district collectors and below, saw work of around 15 MPs. All of this was my orientation in some sense to the impact space, to the governance space. Because growing up in Delhi, the only interaction you have with the government is the Delhi police, right? Nothing beyond that. But this was my orientation of sorts. And it also really helped me come out of the quote unquote McKinsey bubble. Right? So, and through those travels, the idea of Samagra was born. The core thesis at Samagra is better governance as a lever to create large scale impact. So our mission is to improve the quality of life of citizens through better governance in the country. And if I were to just explain what we do in one sentence, I think we are a mission-driven governance consulting firm focused on working with the political and the bureaucratic leadership across the country, in the states and sometimes with the government of India, on deep system reforms across different domains such as school education, agriculture, health, skilling, so scheme and service delivery, and so on. And for the last almost a decade now, I've been kind of steering the journey of Samagra. So that's a little bit about me, and I'll now request everyone also on the panel to share their own journeys. And I'll request the participants to actually put down their questions as all of us are speaking in the chat window. I'll request you only to ask the question, but I'll get to know what the question is and who wants to ask a question. So we'll put your questions in the chat window, and we'll go around the panel now. We can go in alphabetical order. Aakanksha, you can go first, followed by Akshay, then Divya and Rohit. Over to you, Aakanksha.
Sure. Thanks, Gaurav, and really excited to be here. It's always heartening to see young people who are considering a career in the impact space, or at least exploring it. So one thing I'll start by saying is you all are already ahead of the curve. You're at least, starting to explore this sooner than later, and I think that's important. But in Gaurav style, I'll quickly share a bit about my journey. Gaurav, I'll share three things that I consider inflection points. And in case that leads to any questions, like Gaurav said, feel free to start putting them in the chat window. I think one thing I'll start by saying is, there was some kida in my mind from a very young age. And one thing I've learned over time is, look, not everyone has this bug. And that's okay. I used to think, wait, why am I feeling like this and why are other people not, expressing this divine discontent with the world? But that's okay. I've realized maybe 90-95% of the world people don't care about that. But I always, and for me, the bug was always, how is it that people learn? How does learning actually happen? Why is it that some people do better in school and some don't? And I was just obsessed with it to the level where, I had a bad reputation amongst I have 2 sisters and lots of cousins, and they used to say, Aakanksha, aa rahi hai, bhag jao. She'll start teaching you something. But there was always this, kind of deep-rooted desire to understand, why do some people excel in life? Why do some people not? How is it that the process of teaching and learning happens? How can that be made better? And the real, kind of accelerator for that was when I was about 10 years old. My family also moved from India to the US. So at a young age, I also got to see 2 very different education systems, which then, took that obsession with all of these topics and deepened them even further. Because in the US, I was going to a public school. It was completely a free education. And in India, I had, gone to a private school. I also found that, the messages I had received in India were, if you're good at math and science, you're a good student. And some of that started really unraveling. And I found literature could be really rigorous. I found that, I was doing in 7th grade these cross-disciplinary projects. We were reading literature from the same time period that we were doing history lessons on. So it really kind of made me see education as much more than math and science, and the role of many other things that go into making a human being successful. And I think that the other big question it planted in my mind was around equity, right? Like, why is it that, based on where you're born or who you're born to, your life unravels in a very, very different way? So that got cemented really well, and in many ways because I was seeing the product of a free education, but in a highly privileged neighborhood that I was living in the US. So anyway, that was kind of the first phase. And when you're young, people tell you, "Ha, bade hoke teacher ban jana." Yes, like people kind of encouraged me and this obsession, but I was a good student and I was achievement oriented. So as I grew older, people started telling me, like who does this? Who gets into education? Who thinks about, impact and equity? So, do the normal things that people are doing. And so that's actually what ended up happening. I came back to India, then moved back to the US, got a double bachelor's degree in mathematics and economics. was very analytical and numbers oriented. And so, my first job out of college was on Wall Street. I was a trader. And I basically worked at Lehman Brothers trading mortgage-backed securities. Now, again, y'all are probably too young, but if you've seen any of the Wall Street movies, you've seen the global financial crisis. So basically, if I went like this, I touched all those traders that were causing billions of dollars of losses, and ultimately, what led to unraveling of Bear Stearns and Lehman, and again, the repercussions all over the world. So that was inflection point 2 in my life, which was a really important inflection point. It was my first job out of college. I joined at the peak of the market. It was like working on Lehman Brothers' 3rd floor was the job to have, right? People were like, you've made it, you're going to be a millionaire. And I worked with incredibly smart people. I think it gave me like the best training very early on in my career. But a year later, you saw what happened with those instruments. So the question it then laid, very firmly in my mind was, how do we use the best resources and the smartest people in the world to create the maximum amount of value for the world, right? And not destroy value in the world, which is what I felt I had done at Lehman. And this is not to kind of say, look, the finance sector is not important. It adds tremendous value in the world. But I think I started seeking for something more. The other lesson it taught me was I also made too much money too early in my career. Like I think I made $250,000 my first year out of college, right? It just didn't make sense. I didn't think the work that I was doing was so difficult. Like I said, I thought I had destroyed value in the world. So it also just didn't make sense. But I think the more important lesson was I knew that money wasn't going to motivate me. After a while, you start realizing, you start thinking about what is it that motivates me, makes me get up and go to work every day. And now I'm seeing some of my friends learn that lesson much later in life, right? People do certain things to get to a certain point in their life and they're like, oh, wait, I'm realizing this wasn't that important to me. So for me, that was an important lesson to learn. I knew that money is important to a certain level for me, and this is very personal. But I wanted more, and I didn't quite know what that more was. So similar to many other people on this call, worked in finance for a few years, went and got my MBA, came out as the next best thing, which was a strategy consultant. So worked at BCG, similar to Akshay. And again, got the privilege of working with some really smart people, great organizations, solve tough, complex problems. And so inflection point 3 in my life was meeting someone named Ashish Dhawan, who some of you might know, started Chris Capital, Central Square Foundation, and now leads the Convergence Foundation. But he said something that really stuck with me. And that's a question I'll pose to this group as well. He came and he spoke about his life journey, and he spoke about it in decades. He said, at 30, I decided to move to India. At 40, I decided I was going to work in education. And it seemed really arbitrary, right? Like we're taught to think very critically about big decisions in my life. And here he was saying he had just put a number on it and kind of just went with it. So the lesson for me at that point, I remember everything he said. I was sitting at the edge of my seat at BCG. And the lesson for me was, what you do in your life is really important, but it's very personal. And don't let others dictate that decision. So if you at some point feel the conviction that, look, I want to try my hand out in the impact space, or, working for the nation or working for a cause is really important to me, you've just got to do it. And then don't wait for the perfect time and place. It's not like some magical stars are not going to align for you. You kind of just have to put an arbitrary date. And so that's what I did. So that then unraveled the second part of my career. So, the first part was checking all the boxes, letting others tell me these are the things to do, and I did it. And I learned a lot in the process and worked with incredible people. But again, I took an arbitrary decision. Went to work one day and said, I'm going to quit. I don't know what it is that I'm going to do, but I'm going to do something in the impact space. And then the rest of that journey, I won't go into just yet. It was similar to Gaurav's, the work of exploring the sector. And I think 10 years later, today, the sector is so much more developed. There is such an incredible amount of resources, people, problems that we're all looking to solve for. So feel really privileged that I made that arbitrary decision. Initially, I said, let me try my hand out and maybe I'll go back to BCG if this doesn't work out. But I've really not looked back. a single day. I think being able to leverage your skills, but having the privilege of being able to apply all of that in areas that you feel deeply passionate about is something else. So that's in a nutshell, very quick version of my story. I'll stop there and maybe tag Akshay to go next.
Yeah, so I think you'll hear lots of repeating trends. So went to IIT Bombay. So I think I never made any conscious decisions about my life till I think the age of maybe 25 or 26, right? So I think I was just a good kid. I listened to what my mom told me. Was good at maths, so went to IIT. I think spent most of my time in IIT playing basketball, primarily. And I think that was the first time I started to kind of experience privilege or the absurdity of the world a little bit, because I think it was the first time I was in an environment where I very quickly realized that I was clearly not even amongst the top 20% smart people there. Absolutely not, right? By ability or intelligence, and a lot of the people who were much more talented than I was on any axis, right? Just would not have as much access as I had to various things because of silly stuff came from a village, didn't speak English. So I think the narrative of meritocracy had a bit of a reverse effect on me, right? Because I'd been fed it my entire life, saying that meritocracy is everything, and anyone who's against meritocracy is an idiot, and the world doesn't function in this manner. And then you kind of enter the space and you're I'm probably the least meritocratically selected person here, right? In some ways, if you really think about it, you start to realize that something's off, right? There are plenty of people who deserve more than me, who aren't getting as much in the same institute as I am, and then they're struggling. So I think Avanti's journey really started there, where we started doing some mentorship. I think it's still there for the IIT Bombay people here, and there's one person. But the student mentorship program started around the time I was in my final year, and that kind of drove some of that home further, because a lot of the kids who were struggling were not struggling because they were academically weaker, or it was just because they couldn't adjust, right? They couldn't adjust. They had no support systems, no one to talk to. And then I think the second big inflection point, I did the same thing as I think two people before me, and then Rohit after me, is just didn't know what to do. The BCG offered me a job. I went into this BCG job and then could not understand why they were paying me so much money. And I think I had the special distinction of being posted almost entirely for my first 2 years in random villages where there were cement plants. And I think earning the BCG salary and wearing a suit in Wadi and random places of that sort, where everybody around you is absolutely poor, and you are living this weird life, adding no material value. I don't even know what I was doing on those cases, right? I didn't know anything about cement manufacturing either. So similar to Aakanksha, I had this very weird out-of-body experience as to what it is that I was doing, and I think started to do silly stuff, not silly but somewhat nutty stuff, take half my salary and then distribute it amongst the people there, let them start small businesses, and then watch those businesses fail because there's no sustained credit, because somebody falls sick and they have a health emergency. So that I think was very instructive. Then I spent some time actually. So I think I had the most gradual transitional path. So then BCG was very kind to let me go work at second me to a couple of non-profits. I worked with the World Food Program for a bit, then I worked with Save the Children, with other large non-profit for a bit. And then was still kind of I didn't know what I wanted to do. I think to add to Akanksha's point, I think working in impact was interesting, but I think it was also a very important question to what I wanted to do in impact, right? There's so many things you could do, right? Work in a big non-profit, work in a multilateral, work in the IAS, start something on your own. And I think I had too much of an engineering kida my entire life, that I always wanted to build stuff. I was very obsessed with building things. So went to business school. While I was in business school, I really got really excited about healthcare. Ended up being the first employee at this healthcare startup that did really, really well. Ended up dropping out of business school and moving to the Bay Area. And I think the final decision really that ended up happening was, by all measures, I really thought that I had figured out something I liked, right? Between a good intersection of technology and healthcare impact and kind of lifestyle. And we had started Avanti on the side at that point in time, right? And it was a volunteer collective. We started at IIT Bombay, and I was fundraising there. So I would basically work 2 jobs. So I had my regular job and then my weekend job of raising money for Avanti for a while. And very quickly, I think 2 years, 3 years in, it became very clear what I liked more. Right? Like it just very naturally kind of dawned on me that I just have increasingly diminishing zero interest in what I was doing as my day job, and a lot more interest in coming back to India and working for people in India. And I think moved back in 2013. I've been doing it since. And I think and now when I reflect back on it, I think some of the same things that Aakanksha shared, right, which is that I think for most of you who are participating in this challenge, I think you will find a way to kind of meet your basic needs in life, right? You'll find a way to earn enough money, and I think that answer is also different for different people, and you'll find an answer. Like most of you are probably creative enough that you'll find a way to live the lifestyle you want to live. I think the much harder thing is to find something that you like doing every day, right? Like and it's a very nuanced personal answer, right? Like for me specifically, even within Impact, I like doing very specific things. Like I get excited about very, very specific things. And I think we're very fortunate now that someone like me with very specific interests can do those specific things and still have leverage and have scale, right? And it'll be the same for Gaurav, same for I think many others here, right? So I think we're in a very good place. I think 2013 when I came back, I think maybe even and when Gaurav and all started and Aakanksha started TFI, I think it was like there was nothing. Like there were only 3 jobs you could do, or you could start your own non-profit. Like that was basically the palette of options. And if you started anything on your own, there was no money and no one even knew who the donors were, right? So I think it's been really important to kind of revisit that question every few years, right? And say that am I fundamentally enjoying what I'm doing, and am I solving problems that are big enough to solve, exciting to solve? And I think for me, the other thing to keep in mind is that the most exciting problems you'll solve will typically be in spaces where there isn't kind of conventional effort, right? Like, so the most exciting problem is not going to be in finding arbitrage in stocks, right? Because there's plenty of money to be made there. There's plenty of smart people working on those problems, and the problem you will get to solve is unlikely to be earth-shattering, right? So that's not the reason to do it. If you're really, really excited about solving stuff that people haven't solved before and that are hard to solve, it ends up being typically either in research or in the impact space, right? Because that's where there is very naturally a shortage of resources, talent, effort. So in some ways, even if you want to take a very, very analytical view of it, right, and you will find many more exciting, difficult, rewarding problems to solve here. And there are trade-offs you'll obviously make, right, in your life and what you can have and cannot have. But I think my general view is if you're fundamentally excited about solving big, gnarly, complex problems, there's a lot to do here. It's really exciting. It's fun.
Thanks, Akshay. I'll just, before I request Divya to come in, I'll just put spotlight on one thing that you clearly glossed over in your journey, which is that you quit HBS, Harvard Business School, in the middle to kind of join this healthcare startup, which is something that none of us have actually done. All of us completed our studies and then did what we were doing. So share a little bit about that what was the thought process? Did you ever think about going back and completing your degree at HBS or no?
So I think I left. I left on a leave of absence. So I didn't leave with the intent of quitting. And the idea was similar to what Aakanksha said, right? That it was a 5-year leave of absence. The startup was doing really well, so I figured that look, either I'll get really, really wealthy and I won't need to go to HBS, or I'll decide to go back. I think so. But when I decided to do Avanti, I think that was the final nail in the coffin. Like I was just not going to go back, because I also then suddenly lost all interest in the MBA, right? Like at that point in time, what I would learn at HBS would not really be more valuable or even mildly interesting to me, right? So I think the decision if I'd stayed in the US, I think I probably would have gone and finished. But I think because I came back, at that point, I think I took a bunch of these decisions and just wasn't like there was nothing I could do. And I think now when I go back and I'm still in touch with many of my professors, right? I think the lived experience of having been here over the last 7, 8, 9, 10 years in India, right? Through all of the chaos, there's no way to have substituted that with some college degree, right, of any form. And that, I think, just to reiterate my point, I mean, those kinds of things are rare. Like it's very rare to find things to do for 5, 7, for many of us, like 10 plus years, where we are still excited about them and we've still not solved them. Like, and we're still like, oh, what do we do now, right? It's rare to find something that will occupy you for a 20, 25, 30-year career. So yeah, I never really, after I came back, I never really considered going back. I did before I came.
Cool. Thanks, Akshay. Over to you, Divya, the only civil servant amongst all of us. Yeah, over to you.
Gaurav. Hello everyone, I'm Divya Mittal. I will very briefly tell you about my journey. I was born in Delhi in a reasonably middle class family, and I was what Aakanksha described as the good student. So I had a very conventional definition of success. So I did what I was supposed to do. I aced all my exams. I got into IIT. Then I got into IIM with the intention of getting like the best job on campus. But there was this tiny voice in my head always, which used to tell me that, look, I want to do something for the people of my country. And I used to, just subdue it. And when someone like Gaurav would come on campus to recruit, I would feel a deep sense of respect for that person and also slight guilt that I am not listening to that voice in my head. But nonetheless, I muffled it completely, went to London. Like Aakanksha, I was also a trader, which is very surprising that two lady traders, because lady traders are like really rare to find, at least in those days, they were very rare. So I was doing something similar to Aakanksha. I was in London. Before going, I had also PPO from Maryland. So I went to London, I started working. And then I realized that the tiny voice in my head was actually not tiny. So it became louder with time and went on becoming louder, and to a point that I just couldn't go on. So that is when I decided to explore what you are now calling in the impact space. So in those times, we forget about the impact sector. We did not even have this kind of vocabulary, which we are now using here. So I started exploring and I came back to India, did some things, and then eventually joined the civil services as an IAS officer. Because I felt at the time that it will give me a very wide canvas to do things. It will give me an opportunity to make a meaningful impact in the lives of people. So which is what I'm doing now. I won't go into very many details of what I do, but because all of you people are like young and I'm like Aakanksha said, you're already way ahead of the curve. Like compared to me, I hardly knew that we could get into things like this and make a meaningful difference. I'll just tell you 2-3 things which are maybe nothing to do with the topic also. One is that no matter what you do, whether you're in the impact sector, whether you're making money, there'll be times in your life when you'll be stuck, you'll be frustrated, you'll be angry with yourself. So at that point of time, you have to listen to that tiny voice that I talked about. We all have it. We just create too much noise in our heads so that we don't have to listen to it. So listen to that and you'll always get the right answer. Secondly, a lot of us talked about, like Akshay also did and Aakanksha did, about taking risk. So whenever you're making a decision, don't make it out of fear, especially. Your intention should be right. If your intent is right, the decision will come out to be right automatically. So don't feel, and you sometimes when you're listening to that voice and you've decided to do something, you just have to take the plunge. So no matter how much you think you know something, eventually you will get cold feet at the last moment. So you have to do that. Thirdly, I think it is quite all right to make money, even though like Aakanksha, I'm also not too much into money. It's all right to do whatever you're doing. But with whatever you're doing, you always have this opportunity to make a meaningful difference in the lives of people, which I would recommend all of you try at your personal levels or at a professional level, whatever you do. Because if you try to make a meaningful difference to the lives of people, you'll actually see that it makes a meaningful difference to your own life. You will like your life so much better if you're able to do something for somebody else. So I don't know if I should get into the details of my IAS, what I did as an IAS officer. I think I'll leave that to questions if you guys are interested. I think I'll like to stop here. Thank you, Gaurav.
Thank you, Divya. And again, as they were speaking, the early part, I was reminded of when I started traveling across the country. One of the first visits actually I did to Chitrakoot in UP, and that's something that I did with Divya.
Yes.
Talking to the civil services and was waiting for the academy to start, and then we did that travel together.
In fact, I would like to elaborate on that, like not the visit per se, but small points. So, we always feel that, I am in a space which maybe doesn't make that much of difference. And the other, like the grass is always greener on the other side. So I saw there that they were doing brilliant job. So they were like really transforming the lives of the village. They were creating an ecosystem. And at that time, Lal Krishna Advani ji used to be like active in politics. And they said that when he went over to that same place, he felt that they were doing such a better job than even him. So here's this person who had the entire canvas of the entire country, and he felt that those, that couple who's living in that village and trying to create an ecosystem is doing a better job. So I just want to say that, in whatever you're doing, you can do a good job. You can make an impact. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Divya. Over to you, Rohit, now.
Hi everyone. I think it's a tough act to follow. But one, I want to start by just congratulating, I think, Samagra and everybody here for sort of doing this. I think stories have a lot of power to inspire us. So I think even just hearing from different people here has been fantastic. I think all of us on the panel here share a bunch of things. Either it's the IIT Connect or it's the Consulting Connect. I think, in fact, Akshay and I were in college around the same time. He was 1 or 2 years senior to me. And I actually accompanied him on some of these cement cases in BCG. So Wadi was the town between Karnataka and Maharashtra. And I think Akshay and I used to take the train every Monday and then back every Friday. And it was quite an exciting sort of experience. But let me very quickly tell you about my story. So I think, like many of the others here, there are many similarities. As a middle class kid raised by a single mother, in my case, science was kind of the only option. So it wasn't even I wasn't even considering humanities at the time. When I was looking at any of this, so I went to IIT. But what happened in IIT was fantastic, because I think IIT was the first place which was like a melting pot, and then for the first time, you could take your own decisions, I think, in some way, and it allowed some fantastic room for experimentation. Actually, that's also the place where I really started to understand the importance of early initiation into some of these things. So IIT Bombay, for instance, where I went, has a very vibrant student politics culture. The politics is not wherein political parties get involved in student politics, but it's basically students coming up with their manifestos, going and campaigning and, trying to get elected. And that was my first initiation into that step. So I started with, small. So I was the photography and fine art secretary of my hostel in the first year, then the cultural secretary, then I became the GSEC. And in my fourth year, I contested an institute-wide election as the General Secretary of Academic Affairs. And all of these, and this act of making manifestos, going and trying to convince people why I should be voted for, and then finally having the opportunity to sit in the Institute Senate with faculty, I think were for me some of the things that really changed how I thought about what kind of impact I wanted to make. And one of the very interesting reforms that had happened while I was at IIT Bombay is that, unlike some of the other IITs, IIT Bombay did not have a major minor kind of curriculum set up. And usually what happens is that students get into IIT, they pick a stream which is according to their rank is likely to get them the best job, but they don't necessarily enjoy studying it. And that reduces their motivation and everything else. So we were campaigning as the student community to try and get a major minor system in IIT Bombay. And I was a part of the Institute Senate, where this was finally voted upon. In some ways, I think that kind of became my initiation into, what is policy, right? The power of sort of designing things that have a ripple effect on, what sort of growth comes after. But as with most IITians, I also wanted to sort of get a T1 job and all that. So I ended up at BCG. It was a fantastic experience. But during those 2 years there, while I think BCG did give me a lot of exposure, a lot of great skills, this part, my initiation into policy and then what it can do was something that stayed with me. And what happened while at BCG was, in my second year at BCG, I very proactively started to reach out to different people to understand what can you do in the policy space, right? And as Gaurav was saying earlier, as Akshay was saying and the others were saying, a couple of years ago, like 10, 15 years ago, the space was not as well developed. So I spoke to a bunch of people trying to figure out that if I really wanted to get involved in policy, what is my practical real option, right? I spoke to a prof from Bangalore who said that unless you are willing to sort of leave everything and then go on the grassroots, then, it's not working. There were others who gave different advices. But I knew, everybody has different kinds of strengths. And I knew that I needed to do something where I could use my thinking hat to design solutions at scale. And so while looking, I ended up finding, after lots of, I think 2 months of trying to sort of find something, I found this organization called PRS Legislative Research, which actually runs the LAM Fellowship, and it's based in Delhi. And they work with members of parliament to support them in coming up with better legislation. I took the jump. And fortunately, some of the guys at PRS, the founders, were also engineering background. So I think they valued the fact that there was an engineer who was going to sort of try and make it in policy. So I jumped and I worked there for 3 years. It was a fantastic experience looking at Parliament up close. I think I got a huge kick when I went and read Sushma Swaraj on the petroleum pricing that they were discussing at the time, and I was like, okay, this is really what I want to do. But after PRS, I decided to work with a member of Parliament. So that is actually where Gaurav and I first met. And this was Mr. Jay Panda, who's right now a national vice president of the BJP. But at that time, he was a Lok Sabha MP for the Biju Janata Dal from Odisha. And I led his policy team for 2 years. During that time, we put in multiple bills in Parliament, tried to push accountability, stuff on free speech, and a bunch of other stuff. And I think that's where I kind of found my calling. But during that time, what we also realized is 2 gaps that I realized. One is that there is not, so during at Mr. Jayapanda's office, we started doing these policy workshops across the country where we would try to reach out to young people to get them more interested in engaging with government. And one thing I realized is that there was a lot of cynicism in people and a little bit of fear of politics and governance. But I think you can ask anyone who's worked up close, you will realize that it's not that bad. In fact, there are a lot of constraints that politicians face, which cause a lot of these troubles. So anyways, the idea was we realized that during working there that, there is a lot of talent that probably wants to get into this space. But one, there's a little bit of cynicism. And 2, they don't understand what structured platforms can be used to get in. So that. And the second thing I realized during that office was a lot of civil society organizations and businesses used to come and meet parliamentarians trying to say that, hey, here is this evidence. This is how you can design policy better. Can you help translate this into law? But what I realized is a lot of these people did not have structured platforms of doing this. So they did not, basically, even where there was evidence, there was no structured platform to do advocacy to take that into policy. So these 2 things actually became a trigger for what I currently run. One is called Young Leaders for Active Citizenship, where we basically try and build capacity of young people and get them engaged with governance. And the second is a consulting firm that I run, which is policy consulting, TQH. And what that is trying to do is to see how evidence can be moved into policy more systematically. So what we design as laws are better made, well thought out, so that they actually pan out in implementation the way they are supposed to. And in implementation is where Gaurav and many of the others sort of come in and sort of make it all tight up, sort of as it goes ahead. So, that's a little bit about my journey. I'll stop here.
Thanks, Rohit. Again, one thing I've not talked about is the streak for politics, which started at some point in time and then died down. But we'll come to that probably later in this thing. We have questions that have begun to come in. So I request Aditya Ganju, who has a question for Divya, to ask that.
Yeah.
Aditya.
Hi, ma'am. So my question is regarding how do we collect data? How does the government collect data that is so macro level? For example, I understand there are thousands and thousands of students who are studying at schools, or people who are migrating out of districts or out of states. Considering that it is not possible to do it technically, what are the various measures or various methods the government uses to collect this data?
Okay, so that's a good question, especially in your context, because most of you people will be somewhere in the private or the semi-government kind of system. So the difference between government and any private sector is basically the grassroots. So we have people in the villages. So we have an Asha Bahu who is a person of the village who's taking care of the public health of the people. Then we have something called a Patwari or a Lekpal who's looking at the land records, who's allotted a particular village. Similarly, there's a secretary of the village. So these people literally know every family, and there is this Pradhan, as you may know, who's the head of the village. So we actually have first-hand data collection. So we get data of school enrollment from the school itself. So all that data gets collated and collected and reaches up to so there'll be like, so the country is divided into states. Within states, there are districts, and districts within that, there are blocks, and then there are villages. So at level, you have officers. So there are village level officers who pass it on to the block level officer, who pass it on to a district level officer, and then it goes to someone like me who's the district magistrate and looks at the entire data and then works with it. I hope I have answered your question.
Yes, ma'am. But understanding that there are so many levels involved, there would be a lot of error in the overall data that we get at the central level or state level. So, how do we gauge what is the error and how do we? I just wanted to understand the high level picture of it, because we'll be working in data in all our fields.
Okay, so that is in fact one of the very critical problems that we are facing in the country. So what we do is that we tell someone to do some job and then we ask them, so bhai, have you done the right job? So obviously what will be my answer if you ask me if I'm doing the good job? I'll say yes, I'm the best, right? So we ask the same village functionaries as to like, okay, so have you touched every family or how many students are out of school? So of course there is this huge problem of data collection. But now with the technology, and you'll be surprised at the level of technology that is being used in the government now. So right from biometric attendance of teachers, so there's a lot of data which is automatically being collected, and there are checks at multiple levels. So if let's talk about school enrollment. So there'll be a surprise checks. That is one thing. Similarly, how many midday meals are going for the students on a particular day. So you can just basically check the data, but there's still a lot to be desired. So I think the only solution to this is technology, and which is where some of you people may actually come in, because most of you are also from engineering kind of backgrounds or the private sector, who can provide solutions to make the data people free to that extent, especially the village functionary as much as possible independent. So that is how we can correct the bias. But you are right, there's a lot of bias, and in fact the GDP numbers that you see, the crop numbers that you see, so how much wheat was grown, all of it comes from us. And if one of, we decide that, okay, this year, we are going to show that it was a bumper harvest, you will feel that India has done tremendously well. And if we decide that, no, that, all the crops have failed, you will see, oh, India has done really badly. So that is a challenge which I think you guys can work on.
Yeah. No, just adding on to the point around technology solving for data reliability. The one conceptual way of framing it, Aditya, is to see this transition from data digitization to data entry to data emit. So data digitization is when you have things on a physical sheet of paper and then you collect it somewhere and somebody is kind of converting it to a digital format. Data entry is when you're doing stuff and you're directly, there's no physical thing, you're directly putting data in the in some software, in some portal, in some app. And data emit is when you're really going on just doing your job, and some data is automatically getting emitted as part of that. For example, we're using Google Maps. We're going from one place to another. We use it for our travel, but a lot of data in the process is getting emitted of where we were, what times of the day we do what, and so on and so forth. So in governance also, the more and more we can shift from data digitization to data entry to data emit, the reliability of data will only increase. And that's the macro trend. It's a lot needs to be done, but that's the conceptual framework under which the reliability of data can increase over time. We also have, in addition to the participants that we can see on the screen here, there are a set of audience also joining whom we are not able to see who are not in here. They are also asking questions. So I'll just pick one of those questions from the Q&A window, which says, what are the most challenging aspects of working in this impact space? And do you at any point in time felt that you want to go back post the transition? I'll ask Aakanksha and probably then Akshay to kind of answer that question.
So, one of the challenges, there are many, to be really, and again, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This is a tough sector to work in. So maybe I'll highlight a couple, and then, I think Akshay, Rohit, Divya, you all should also chime in. One thing I do miss about just being in a purely for-profit capitalistic organization, right? I think most of the world today, or most of the organizations, and this is oversimplification, but the bottom line is, profits, money, right? And it's a metric that all of us understand. It's become simplified, and so based on how much money someone makes or an organization makes, you can gauge whether or not it's successful. And similarly, what it means for an individual, right, is as a trader, Divya will resonate, like you could see your P&L every day. It's simple. It's like right there in front of you. As a consultant, if you've added value to the client, you get paid. There's a sense of closure that comes. And that's one thing I miss, So to be honest, impact space now, again, if I'm overly simplifying, profits are not the number one metric, right? It's impact. Now, the truth about impact is, and all of us on this call also have probably been pulling our hair out on what is really impact, how do you quantify it, how do you measure it. Some of your data questions are ultimately also related to that, right? It's really tough. I mean, ask Akshay, showing how children learn and how they learn at scale and how much each child it is so difficult. So again, this is very broad brushstrokes right now, but one of the challenges in the sector is definitely that if you're putting impact first, whether it's health outcomes, learning outcomes, policy outcomes, it's very difficult. The world hasn't yet moved to a place where we've simplified these outcomes as much as we have, when it comes to profits and money being the bottom line. So I think that's one. I think the other real challenge I have to say, and this is because I personally know most of the panelists, I think obviously I could argue I always worked in sectors where, the default was to work long hours. But I think we see a significant amount of burnout even in the impact space, right? Because now you're working on causes that you are so deeply passionate about, and the problems are incredibly complex, and the bottom line is very elusive and difficult to understand, right? So when you combine all of that, the truth is that most people feel significant, burnout. You're also working long hours because now you also these are tough challenges and you want to get to some glimmers of hope. So I think the burnout in this sector is very real. We've seen that both just in terms of hours, but sometimes it takes longer to see impact, see the needle shift. It's something that all of us are trying to accelerate. So, maybe those are two that I'll pause here and let others chime in as well.
And Aakanksha, also, have you ever considered going back? Was the other part of the question, and then we'll pick up the other questions after this.
Yeah, I mean, look, that question, I think if we're all being really honest, we've all asked it at some point, right? Like, is this really worth it? But I'll quote a story that I often quote. There was a few years ago, there was this nurse in Australia, Nurse Bronnie Ware, who worked in palliative care. So she worked with patients right before they were dying. And I know this sounds a little bit morbid, but just stay with me. So she used to often ask them, what are your big regrets as you're nearing, this part of your life? And then she wrote a blog entry, which later became a book. But as you can imagine, a lot of, people's regrets in life usually are things that we would imagine, right? I wish I spent more time with family, or I wish I had done that jumping out of a plane, which was on my list, but never. But the number one thing on people's list was, I wish I had, worked in the job, or I wished I had lived a life or a career that was really true to myself, right? And again, that stays with me. Work is something that we do 4, 5, 6, 7 days of the week. You spend more time doing work, or what we consider work, than spending time at home, or sometimes even with your significant other. It's just such a meaningful part of who we are and what we do in life. So at the risk of sounding really meta right now, whenever those questions have come, and like Divya said, that voice inside your head, for me, it's always asking, I don't want to have regrets. And ultimately, the answer for me has been really simple. This is the work that I want to do. This is the body of work that I would want to leave behind. And so I think in spite of all the frustrations and the up and down, for me, like I said, there hasn't really been a looking back. This is, and again, the other way to ask this question is, what do you feel FOMO from? Divya shared this a little bit, right? Whenever people would come on campus, the truth is, even though I wanted to get a job in trading or consulting, I didn't feel FOMO. The real FOMO used to be people like Akshay, who used to come and say, this is what I'm doing, or, hearing Ashish. So let that be your internal, radar a little bit. I think wherever it is that you're feeling most FOMO, that's where ultimately your heart wants to be. And for me, I think I've realized that'll always be in this sector. So yes, those questions do come up, but I'm still here and looking forward to staying in this sector.
Thanks, Aakanksha. I'll request Giridharan from MBI Gurgaon to ask the next question. He has a question for Akshay. And we'll keep the questions and both the answers short, because I want to cover a few of them. There are many of them in the chat window and the Q&A section. Giridharan.
Thank you, Gaurav. So the question as such is to Akshay. So at an age where human interventions are considered too mainstream and are believed to be non-scalable at all times. How is Avanti consistently sustained the mentorship model?
Yeah, so I think that's a extremely good question. I think the one thing to remember is I think caregiving has always been very human, right? So there's no good evidence that you can do caregiving in a meaningful manner. We'll eventually get there and it will become assisted and other such things. But caregiving spans everything from the work of the ASHA worker to the palliative health worker to a teacher to and even honestly just caring for a district, caring for a group of people who you work with. And I think that I think is one, right? So where from an evidence perspective, there's actually a lot more evidence of human-led models actually creating impact and human initiative more than anything else creating impact than tech. Tech can only act as an enabler on top of some of that stuff, right? So that I think is one. I think the other quick point there is I think in terms of sustaining human-led models or people-led models, I think it's really important to think of them as movements. Partly I think why all of us are here, right? Like in some way or the other, I think all of us believe that there's a lot of time, energy and capability amongst especially younger people early in their lives, right? And I think they want an outlet for it. If you can kind of channel them in the right direction, they can do pretty amazing things. That's one of my core beliefs in life. So I think and it's worked out well for us so far.
Thanks, Akshay. The next one I'm asking on behalf of the participant because again they're not visible here, and it's a question I request Rohit to take. Are there any specific archetypes of people joining the sector? Are there specific qualifications, skill sets, backgrounds that you see more commonly than others?
I think I wouldn't say that. I mean, see, the sector is very broad. I do think that increasingly, at least I've been noticing that there are a lot of people from consulting background and engineering who are sort of coming in, and I think they are trying to sort of fix the problem solving sort of, the part of the puzzle. But if you look at the sector, it's very broad. There's, a lot of stuff happening on the ground. There is work that happens with grassroots. There's work that happens with government. There's work that happens with legislators. So at least for us, I see in my own team, I see lawyers, urban planners, political scientists, sociologists, engineers, and a bunch of people. So I wouldn't really, in fact, I always like to say that impact and policy and all of the governance space is very intersectional because, you need to understand there is a human element to the problem where the humanities bit comes in, there is a data element to the problem, there is an element of management. And so I would say that there is sort of space for everybody to sort of figure out the role for themselves.
Cool. Next, I'll request Manik from Manik Narayanan to ask a question to Divya.
Yeah, good evening, ma'am. So I wanted to understand, so how do you assess the multitude of possible effects an administrative level decision would have on the multiple stakeholders that are involved?
So this is a generic question, so I'll give a generic answer. So to assess the impact on any stakeholder, the only way is to go and talk to them. And for that, the district administration is the focal point for all of government. So for instance, I'll give you some examples. So in the past, there have been certain legislations or some things which people have agitated about, whether it was the farm laws or whether it was the Agnipath Yojana which just came. So all the feedback that goes up to the government is through us in some form. So we talk to these people. We have lots of meetings with the industry groups, farmer groups. We meet with them literally on a monthly basis. So we assess. We collect all the information, we take their opinions in writing and also then organize it and then send it across. Also, we do some value add in terms of organizing it in terms of making it more coherent for the government. So I'm not exactly sure what you mean by how do you assess. So I think, does it answer your question somewhat?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, that was more or less what I was looking for.
Yeah.
There's another question, Divya, I want you to take, which is around, do you see any gender-specific challenges with regards to women when it comes to government and the impact space? So you can take the government part of it, maybe Aakanksha can take the impact space part of it. And while you're doing that, if Rohit, Akshay, you guys can also type answers to some of the questions. I know there are more questions, we'll not be able to take all of them. In the Q&A window, you can kind of also type answers to some of the questions that you
That's a very interesting question, and now that I think of it, quite expected. So this is to all the ladies out there. So this is also part of it will be specific, part of it will be general. See, in the government sector, when you're working with the grassroots people, so you're working with villages, you're working with the people who are very traditional in their outlook. They've not seen their women work, except let's say in the fields. They have not seen women going and leading and commanding. So in a law and order situation, I'll actually go with the police, and I am the one who gives commands to them. Okay, now you do a lathi charge, or now you fire. So those are kind of roles people have not seen women in. So there is this initial feeling that, ye kaise kar payegi kind of thing. So they start off with slight amount of skepticism. Let me tell you, I've seen in my own journey, if your heart is in the right place and you are working hard, they follow you and they come with you like it is nobody's business. So whether it's my team or it's the villages, if I tell them that, look, this needs to be done, there has not yet come a moment when they've not done it. In fact, they surprise me and they surpass all my expectations. And maybe part of it is also they feel, okay, she's doing it, and we need to go with her vision. So that is in general. But the second part I would like to say is that being a lady, especially I would say in India, where ladies are still confined to the homes many of the times, the spotlight is sort of always on you. So you know, because out of if they're out of 100, let's say IT girls, if they're like 10 girls. So whether you do the right thing or the wrong thing, whether you do it good or well or worse, you'll always be in focus. So you'll be a topic of conversation. So they'll be like, ladies are bad officers because they do XYZ. But there'll be thrice the amount of men who will be doing the same things. So being in the spotlight makes it tougher. It has some advantages also, but it will always make your life tougher. So you should behave in a manner which you think is appropriate for yourself. I'm not saying for the society, but how you want yourself to be seen in society. And then I don't think you'll face any specific problems in the government sector or any sector for that matter.
Aakanksha, you want to add to that from the impact space perspective?
I mean, we'll need hours and hours for this conversation, honestly, and something that, over time I've become much more involved with, even at ACT and leading ACT for Women now. I think what I'll highlight are two things, right? One, on the surface in this sector, things look a little different, right? What do I mean by that? Like Divya said, like in trading, there were hardly any women, right? Even in my own career trajectory, I'll tell you, when I joined Lehman, it was like barely any women and mostly men. It was so visible on the trading floor because anyway, there are no offices. You see every person laid out right then and there, right? Fast forward to consulting, where at least at entry level, it was 50-50. And then, so what is different at the surface level is, at least in the impact space, and this is not, IAS and government perhaps, so maybe I'm speaking much more on, the philanthropy, not-for-profit, impact investing side. The mouth of the funnel is actually exactly opposite of what you would see in, the corporate sector. So corporate sector, usually we say 70-30, 20-80 favor towards men. Impact space starts out, like Teach for India, which is a good sample. We brought in 600 fellows every year, but it's roughly 70-30, 80-20, but favoring women. And part of it you could also argue is, on average, women maybe are more drawn towards the, roles that are more towards grassroots, care, compassion factor is maybe a little bit higher. So at the surface level, it looks like, hey, there are more women. You also see more women in teaching and education, for example, right? So that's surface level. But the second thing I'll highlight is that changes very quickly, right? As you go up the pyramid, things start looking quite similar across all sectors, is what I've realized. So, leadership, whether it's in finance, at BCG, again, things have dramatically changed. But when I joined, there was one female partner and 30 male partners. And similarly, you see leadership in the impact space quite similar. You see that on the top, it's more male heavy. So my larger point I'm going to highlight is, personally, I don't think that even though things look different at surface level, I think the challenges are quite similar. It should not deter anyone from making a decision to join the sector. If anything, sometimes I find telling men, hey, you don't back out impact space is, it's gender neutral and everyone is welcome and needs to join. But again, I think the challenges with respect to gender, like Divya outlined a few, they continue to be what they are in our country. And I think the only way to work through them is we need equal parts men and equal parts women to be working together. Otherwise, we'll never find that balance. So I'll just leave it there for now, Gaurav.
Thanks, Aakanksha. I know this conversation can continue and not just this topic. There are many other threads that are coming. I'll just take one last one from Iti. I know Akshay has answered that in the chat window, but Iti, if you will ask that, and Rohit, if you could take that question.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask, all of you all had some sort of a financial security before making the kind of switch that you all ended up making, right? So say if you didn't have the security, would you make that switch so early? And all of us, most of us right now wouldn't have that security. So even if we'd want to work in this sector, we'd want to kind of get more of a corporate experience first and have some savings, and then kind of think, should we switch? So what would your advice be then?
So one, I think Akshay answered that question on the chat, but so generally that seems to be the impression because the impact space pays lesser than a traditional corporate space. But I don't think it pays that less also. And over the past couple of years, a lot of things have changed as the sector has developed. The salaries have also increased. To be honest, when I moved and I worked with BCG for 2 years, my salary became 1/4 from what it was when I left BCG, and there was obviously a big battle at my house. My mother refusing to talk to me, saying that why the hell have you moved? But I think to the point that Aakanksha said earlier and Divya, there's certain marginal utility to money also, right? I mean, you need some amount of security. Yes, I agree. It also depends on what kind of responsibilities you have at home. But one, the sector doesn't pay that less, and there is a marginal utility to how much do you want to really earn and how much do you really need.
And I'll just add to that quickly because this topic.
Also come in quickly here from Gaurav. Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm saying this is a topic close to our heart as to how do you really create that value proposition for the best talent in the country to take that step to join this sector. And in my mind, that value proposition adds by 2-3 things. Two things have to come together. One, the steep learning curve. You get as steep a learning curve as you would get in a corporate, the best of corporate setup. That's one. Second is you have as fast a growth trajectory as you could potentially get in the corporate world. Of course, you have the job satisfaction by doing something that's really contributing and creating that impact for others. And then you talked about how it makes you feel good as well. And then you may compromise a little bit on the compensation side, but it's not at the levels it used to be earlier of 20%, 30% of what you'll get in the best of corporate. There are a few organizations emerging now which will pay you 70%, 80% of what you'll get in the best corporate. So I think with all of that coming together, the value proposition suddenly starts adding up for a lot of people, and therefore we are seeing a lot more young talent choosing impact as a career from the very beginning, as opposed to the times that all of us graduated and we had to figure out our pathway and see how we kind of land in this space. Aakanksha.
Yeah, so Iti, first of all, great question, and similar to Gaurav, my heart goes out to this question. So very quickly, my answer is it is deeply personal. So each person has to be extremely honest with themselves and say, what do I need to feel, happy? And that the truth is, for some people, money is really important, right? Maybe your foundation for what you feel you need to be happy is just much higher. And I very honestly have to sometimes tell those people, if that is what ultimately motivates you, the sector might not be for you, and you have to be honest, right? But I have found that given, again, the privilege that we're born into, or our own, just the lifestyle that we want to lead, that number varies for people. So I think the first real question is, back at you, which is to say, what is your threshold? And then how do you, inform yourself about where salaries are, what's the right entry point for you to then make sure that you're not compromising on what you consider your basics. As a sector, I do agree with Gaurav, and this is, I think, something that, for example, I get the privilege to also be on the side that, it brings money into the sector. But I think we, as a sector, also are very conscious, and how do we over time make sure that we're compensating people well, that that is not becoming a barrier to entry. So both of those things are also happening simultaneously. And again, like Gaurav said, today salaries have anyway corrected to a large extent. Hopefully that trend continues. But I think a little bit of that is also, like personally figuring out where you need to be to make sure that you're not feeling, FOMO. And then figuring out what are the options available and finding that match.
And I just put this in one thing though is that when you're straight out of college is the easiest time to work in the sector. And I have many people who came and worked with us for 2 years and now gone and become PMs at Google. Like I think when you're early in your life, like if I had we had zero, I can assure you, none of these all had like zero options out of college to go work somewhere, right? But now you'll get paid reasonably well, which is not that dissimilar from what you get paid at an entry-level job anywhere else. And like Gaurav said, you learn a lot more. And और बिल्कुल ही अच्छा नहीं लगा तो फिर apply कर लेना कहीं बाहर एक और degree के लिए, and you can go back to the corporate sector or go straight back in, right? So I think almost inverse to what you're suggesting, I think it's much easier to for your first job, second job to be in the space. Less of a fiscal decision. As you get older, it's a bigger choice.
Yeah, and it's much tougher, by the way, this whole construct that, we'll make a lot of money and then join the sector in 40s and 50s. It's much tougher. I mean, talk to, folks who've done it. Like the unlearning that you need to do, it's just much harder to do it at a later stage in your life. Like I often feel, I wish I had done this even earlier so I wouldn't have had to spend that time to, start from scratch all over again.
So I want to say something.
I want to say something on that too, because that is okay. Iti, this is what I was thinking when I was suppressing that tiny voice inside my head. That I will do it, but let me first earn some money because I need to be like independent. But this is again to everyone, and this is for whatever you do. If you figure out your why, your what and how will be so much easier to figure out. Like what everyone is talking about. That you have various opportunities. You have opportunities which people before you never had. In terms of like working 2 jobs and making money and working at home and making money. But you need your why in order for anything in life. Once that is in order, you will figure out a way. You'll get your answers, you'll do it. But if the why is hazy, then maybe you should wait and wait something. That's what I would like to say.
And I feel just कि अब माहौल बनना शुरू हुआ है and the discussions is only getting deeper and getting started. But I think we're already over time. But I want all of you to share one parting thought with the participants here. Anything that you want to kind of leave them with. Just quick 1 or 2 sentences, but leave them with some thoughts. Anyone can go in your order.
I can go. I think this was something that was mentioned a little bit earlier also. My one parting thought would be that, and I think Divya had said it, that don't be afraid to experiment and be bold. I personally think, and this is something that I have sort of felt, there's a lot of people who are very smart, there are a lot of people who are hardworking, and I think the real thing that cracks it is courage. The ability to experiment, the ability to really try and discover, and that is eventually what helps you find what you really enjoy. And once you find it, the rest, I think, falls into place. So I'll just stop.
Yeah, I'll go. See, especially when one is at your age, we try to look at ourselves from the eyes of our parents, the definition of success from the eyes of our parents, especially, and the society. So what I would like to tell you is that which is fine till now, but now it is time for you to understand what you really want. You don't need to necessarily get into a mold which is pleasing to everybody else. So you should be trying to please yourself only. The only person you need to please is that, face in the mirror. And just leave this whole baggage of what will chachi say and bua say कि उसको तो लोग नौकरी नहीं लगी और उसको तो 10 लाख की लगी और उसको फलाने को 1 crore की लगी. So leave that, because eventually it is not going to matter. If after a few years you realize it never mattered actually. So that's my parting thought to you.
Maybe I'll say the unpopular thing. Look, I think it's a fabulous sector, but it's not for everyone. It's challenging, right? So I don't want to make a hard sell for the sector. I think I'll just reiterate what Divya has said. Just be honest with yourself. But if you have that kida, you've got to come on board. You're never going to regret that decision.
And I'll just add to that. I think it's also, and this is really important to me personally, it's also important to think about where will you shine, right? Like, and I think it's important to acknowledge that you have a lot of potential, right? And will you have room to really express that in a way where you can truly shine as the person you are and what you want to do in the world, right? And if that happens to be an impact, then it has to be impact. Like, figure it out. How, like Divya said, will you stand up?
Sorry, I was on mute. Let me also add my 2 cents to this. I think one thing I feel is important to recognize for everyone here is that we are in that 0.1% of India, which is really privileged. Just by the fact that we are as part of this call, this setup here, it's important to recognize. We sometimes forget about how privileged we are. And therefore, being able to take care of yourself, take care of your families and all is almost a given, right? If you decide to do that, if you want to do that, you in any case will do that one way or the other. And somebody was saying that earlier. So therefore, if that voice is there, if that kira is there, then listen to it and go for it. Don't do too much of calculations and adding up and so on. Just go for it is what this thing would be. Thank you everyone for this discussion, and thank you all the panelists for taking the time and really sharing very, very frankly, very freely all of your experiences and learnings over the years. Thank you so much, and I wish we had more time and could have taken even more questions because abhi, as I said, mahal banna shuru hua tha. But I think there are limitations of the format. So thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.